Chapter 12: European Society in the Age of the Renaissance.
More of Part 1: Intellectual Changes of the Renaissance.
Please, sir, I want some more.
The thing that the Renaissance is most known for is a change of mind. It's an intellectual change. And usually we date this intellectual change back to a early 14th century Italian, Francisco Petrarch.
You're saying it weird. Why you?
Petrarch spends most of his life traveling around Italy trying to find classical text. He loves the work of ancient Latin. And so he is trying to gather up the knowledge of this. And he puts forward the idea that the time period he's living in was this potential rebirth of classical learning, that Europe could emerge out of what Petrarch deemed a near 1,000-year period of dark ages here.
You see? You're stupid minds. Stupid! That's all I'm taking from you. Get back here, you...
And one of the ways in which Petrarch thought we could escape these dark ages was through the study of liberal arts, or studia humanitas, the study of classical works. It's studying of history, of politics, of poetry, of rhetoric. It is a broad field of study. These humanists, they become who advocate for these liberal arts programs, which they felt would make human beings better. They really liked the guy Cicero, who basically was writing on, who was alive right before the fall of the Roman Republic.
Too many cooks, too many.
You know, the works of Cicero were celebrated, were put forward, and it matched these ideas of republicanism that many of the humanists particularly liked during this time period. They also become interested in Greek philosophy, particularly the ideas of Plato. And one of the important concepts from this time period is this concept of virtuo.
You're saying it weird. Why are you putting?
Which, basically just means to be virtuous. But humanists in the Renaissance were taking this idea a step further. They believed in the capability of human beings to change history. And they were saying that a person who studied, who was talented enough, who possessed this virtue, could shape and change history. So humanists thought that education was necessary, was the basis for public good.
Homer, that isn't very nice.
They thought that, urban boys and men, the well-to-do people, that they needed a well-rounded education. Now, these academies are very gendered. They're not open to women, and there's a lot of debate amongst the humanist thinkers about what the proper education for women should look like.
Negative b plus or minus radical b squared minus 4ac over 2a.
That's correct. A girl answered a math problem. You know what that means.
But for men, it was pretty well agreed upon, the curriculum, the studia humanitas. One of the more important works, Castiglione's The Courtier, becomes the guide for men and women at court and the ways in which they should behave. This work gets published widely. It gets translated into multiple languages. And this is one of the ways in which Italian court life, the system that develops around these signores in the 15th century, really becomes the basis for court life throughout Europe.
Too many cooks.
this political thought is going to have influences across the board. We've talked a little bit about republicanism, but there are going to be people who believe that a strong leader, that a king was the best form of government, and that naturally you were going to revert to some sort of system with one person in charge. So the best thing you could hope for was to have this philosopher king, a king who was molded by the ideas of the Renaissance, of having a wide breadth of knowledge and skills and talent. One of the more important thinkers during this time period is this guy, Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli was a Florentine government official. He went on a number of diplomatic missions. But he was part of the Florence government during a period when the Medici family had been thrown out of power. The Medici family is going to get run out of Florence for about 2 decades before they come back and reestablish control in Florence. And so when they come back in control, anyone who was part of the old government lost their job. So Machiavelli, he's out of a job. And so he spends the rest of his life basically trying to win back a position in government. The Prince is one of his first attempts at this, and it's a textbook for how a Renaissance ruler should be run, how a ruler should act. And a lot of people believe that Machiavelli modeled the Prince after this guy, Cesare Borgia, who's an interesting figure. His dad was the Pope from 1493 to 1503. His family, and him in particular, sort of became infamous for their willingness to do whatever to gain and increase their power and to hang on to their power. And so the Prince puts forward this idea that virtue is important. It's particularly important that you appear to be virtuous, but that at the end of the day, a ruler's moral code can be justified by the idea that the ends justify the means. That a ruler at the end of the day needs to do what he has to do to ensure the safety of his city-state. Now, this stuff starts in Italy, but it is going to spread to the rest of Europe very slowly.
Move! 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 Careful, Austin!
This gets to be part of why what counts as the Renaissance, or is the Renaissance a term that's useful, gets kind of hard, because the slow spread of this means that we're talking about several centuries here. We started with Petrarch in the 1300s, and we're going to be talking about people in the 1600s. So it's a pretty wide period of time. But as this spreads, Northern humanists are going to take these ideas and they're going to particularly apply it to the church, because they're going to want to reform the church. There's a lot of problems within the church. The church is seen as being very concerned with worldly matters. The Pope is both a spiritual leader and a political leader at this point. He is in charge of the Papal States. And the Pope is going to be a ruler like other rulers, seeking to enlarge the territory which he controls. And so many Northern humanists were critical of the church. And so what they wanted to do is take the best elements of classical culture and Christian culture and combined it. Two of the most important thinkers of this tradition is Thomas More.
Mr. More, Mr. More, Mr. More.
And Erasmus. Thomas More is an English writer.
He steals from the rich and gives to the poor.
He's most famous for the work Utopia, which was this fictional society. Some believe it was his vision of a perfect society. There's some debate whether this was actually satire or not.
Okay, so then what's satire?
Nobody really knows. Hang on.
Erasmus was from the Low Countries. He wrote a number of important works. He's also going to be a proponent of translating the Bible into the vernacular. So while he's very much in favor of studying Latin and studying Greek, he also feels like the Bible should be accessible to people. And so he's going to be among these early thinkers, early traditions, stressing the need for literacy, particularly biblical literacy. Now, one of the inventions that is integral to the Renaissance is the printing press. And this comes along during the middle of this time period. Again, we talk Petrarch, 1350 as sort of the starting period. Movable metal type printing develops in Germany in the 1440s. Usually we identify Johann Gutenberg as the inventor of the movable type printing press. The idea of a printing press is very old. Korea and China had been using a printing press for centuries at this point in time, but the movable type printing press with the Roman alphabet of 26 letters meant that it was quite easy and affordable to create tremendous amounts of work. Paper becomes more available, and so books go from being this luxury item that takes years of painstaking hand copying work to things that can be printed out in great numbers very quickly. And as a result, you see a huge increase in urban literacy. You see more schooling because you have this ability to bring printed materials to people. And because now you have more people reading, there's more demand for things which can be read. Printing is important for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest things is that it allowed people all of Europe to talk about the same ideas at roughly the same time period. When the Renaissance begins in 1350, the ideas of Petrarch basically had to be spread from person to person. People had to talk, and it had to be communicated sort of face to face.
Watch out! Watch out!
By the time we get to Erasmus and writing books like The Praise of Folly, those books were printed and spread throughout Europe, and the educated population of Europe was reading these ideas of Erasmus very quickly after he had written them. This ease of spread of information made government and church officials nervous, and so you're going to see attempts, all sorts of attempts to censor various written materials. There's going to be, banned book lists. There's going to be prohibitions on books, but these are incredibly difficult to enforce, and people relatively easily get around all of these attempts.
Watch out!